Good day, everyone. Welcome to the next episode of Ordinary People, Extraordinary Stories. The introduction of the next guest, if I have to do it properly, will take a full program. But I will start briefly is that she is a hereditary member of Alberta African American community, fifth generation Albertan, an anti-racism expert and community development, and has worked along women empowerment. Please welcome Junetta Jamerson.
Thank you, Fahad.
Junetta, thank you very much for coming to our show. And I would like to start by asking you this question: Who is Junetta Jamerson?
Well, I'm a wife. I'm a mother. I am a member of Alberta's Black community. I was a performer for a lot of years as well. I've done acting. I've done a few quite interesting things, actually. Yeah, when I look back and I look through all the clippings and press and stuff like that, I'm just like, you've lived a bit of life. So.
Okay, great. So tell us about your family history in Alberta.
So I come from one of the families that comprised the Black immigration to Alberta. Okay. And so I'm a descendant of the first Black people who actually immigrated to the Western Canadian prairies. Okay. So we've had a presence here in Western Canada for over 130 years now. Okay. So it's going back quite some time. I meet people sometimes just casually in the store, and they're just like, well, where are you from? And I said, well, and I just rolls off my tongue. I'm a descendant of the first Black people that settled here in Western Canada. Okay. And they're just like, wow, because they don't know the history.
Yes.
They don't know the history.
That's true.
So that tends to be a pretty good. Okay. It's either a good conversation starter, or if they're trying to come at me wrong, it shuts them down.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So the first settlement of Alberta, which is very famous, is Amber Valley, right? But I believe there were other settlements too, one where you belong to. So tell us some history about those settlements.
You're correct. So the largest settlement is Amber Valley, okay, and my husband's people are from there. Okay. But my family came from what we believe is the second largest settlement. It was called Wildwood. Okay. And it's about an hour going west outside of Edmonton. Okay. And that is where my people decided to settle. And I was just talking just not too long ago with a gentleman that I've known all my life from the Wildwood settlement. And he was reminiscing, and he said, we came to these settlements to get away. You know, we could have gone to the cities, but we wanted to come here, and we just wanted to be left alone. Mm-hmm. And he was reminiscing about that. He's my father's age. And, you know, he was just sort of reflecting back on, you know, what that was like, you know, growing up on an all-Black settlement. I was the first generation born off the settlements. I was born in Edmonton. Okay. But up until that point in time, you know, there was definitely, you know, folks still being born on our settlements.
Okay. All right. So tell us something about your education and career in Alberta and Edmonton.
So I took quite a non-traditional route. Okay. So I guess it's kind of just true to form. My people were quite non-traditional. And I just wanted to add something about our immigration. Sure. That we came at a time in history, and this is coming out now. Mm-hmm. Maybe you've heard about like something called Black Wall Street and like the Tulsa Massacre, mm-hmm, where it's a very prosperous part of Tulsa, all Black owned, a lot of professionals, and they like bombed it into oblivion. Okay. But what a lot of people don't know is that there was in fact a whole spate of massacres, mm-hmm, that were happening mostly in the southern states, but it was pushing north as well, okay, surrounding Black prosperity and upward mobility. Okay. So that was the major push factor for my people to come here. Mm-hmm. And, you know, anyone who's immigrated here, you know that mobility requires money.
Absolutely.
There's many that are left behind, right? In Canada, there's many people from other countries we will never see, yeah, due to lack of resources. And my people had the resources. Okay. So we chartered trains, you know, and made our way when they were advertising some of the really cheap land. But that was why, and that really did tie into, what the elder was sharing. Yeah, that's what we were getting away from. So and I don't know not too many people came en masse to Canada from the United States at that time. So I guess we were a non-traditional group of folks, and I guess that's in my blood. So my whole career in life has also unfolded in a bit of a non-traditional way. I was actually originally in school. I was in pre-med.
Okay.
In science. And I got married. I had children. I also took care of my grandmother all throughout my 20s. I'm the oldest, so the responsibility was more to me. And, after such time, we decided I would, be at home with the children. We didn't want them to go into daycare. And then when my youngest actually went into kindergarten, my twins, I said, okay, I'll re-enter the workforce. But I had, aside from, all those pre-med courses, I had a complete other education from within my own people. And this is something that mainstream and the dominant culture here, number one, doesn't place a lot of value on, and number two, doesn't understand. But when they encounter it, they're typically just wowed and impressed. And, where did you go to school for that? Who trained you how to do that? What classes can I take? And I'm just like, you can't. Sorry.
So let's talk about racism in Canada, in Alberta, specifically towards the African community, because as you've mentioned that you are one of the early settlers in Alberta, and there were other peoples with you as well. So let's touch base on racism.
Well, racism established this province. It was not any of our territory before. It was indigenous land. And the main modus operandi that the Dominion of Canada, as it was called then, employed to get their land was actually starvation. And there's books written about this, very credible books, well researched, that speak to this, the starvation pogroms that weakened the indigenous nations and then set it up for the land grab. So those treaties that, we speak, that we are on Treaty 6, for example, those treaties are living agreements. However, what a lot of folks in mainstream don't talk about, but the indigenous folks will, is that they were signed under duress. That's the foundation of the settler state that you and I are in now. So when my people immigrated here, it was still actually in the throes of the seizure from the indigenous folks. So we came at quite a tumultuous time. And it didn't take long for us to have trouble. By the time 1911, the same year that my people came, there was actually an order in council trying to ban any more African American immigration. It almost received final assent from Sir Wilfrid Laurier, the Prime Minister at the time. And by 1915, that order was so effective that pretty much African American immigration was over by 1915. And we were basically the only black people here until like the 70s, about when folks from the Caribbean slowly started to come in. Immigration policy had opened to them. So that's a little bit of how it started. The ban, however, was the least of our problems. However, the immigration effect, it had a very harmful long-term impact. And we can measure it now. History is on our side. We can look back and reflect. We can assess what took place. What any cultural group needs in order to remain a unique cultural group, you need new thought, you need new numbers, you need new blood. We didn't have that because it was cut off. So the families all married one another or they married out.
Yeah.
And like I know there's some people in my community who are in denial about this, but literally my community is ceasing to exist as we speak.
Okay.
As we speak. We needed more numbers. We needed to not be the only group that came. All other groups, if you just even just think off the top of your head, have enjoyed successive waves of immigration.
Yeah.
Not us. One. One. And it's coming to an end. And it, really it saddens me to see that, but there's reasons for that. Maybe we'll get into that a little bit later. But it was here from the beginning. And what a lot of folks also don't know is, so obviously we came from the United States,
Yes.
but much more American immigrants who came were white. And they were, in fact, the closest non-Canadian population, you just look by way of the geography, to meet the Dominion of Canada's need to fill the prairies. Because if we're going to empty them of the indigenous people, we got to get people in, get them in, get them in, get them in. Because what they feared is that they may regroup and mount up something to take back their land. That's always been their fear. Okay. So let's get other people in, get them in. And it was Americans that came. They didn't have a language barrier, like maybe some of the Eastern European folks, like maybe if they're from the Ukraine or Germany or Poland, there was a language barrier there. Yeah. They knew, but the Americans didn't have that. They also knew the political system because it's highly similar, right? They knew the landscape if you were in not the landscape, but how to contend with the environment. They knew how to farm. They knew how to grow. I mean, think about it. If you're in the Midwest and you farm, you can pretty much farm up here too. Yeah. You know that. And so what happened was they came and they quickly scrambled up the social hierarchy. Okay. Right? The socioeconomic hierarchy, and kind of had their elbows out for anyone else, right? So even if you were white, but from overseas in Europe or stuff, they had their elbows out for them too. Equality was for them. Okay. And their ideology came. Ideology that actually differentiates Alberta from any other province to this day. To this day. But it's because of its American origins that brought the prevailing attitudes, which set down something that I call a cultural algorithm as to how we do things around here. Building into that is who's on top and who's on the bottom. It is a replica of the United States and the ideologies that formed their differentials. And that is why.
Okay. All right. Now, that was 1911 and 1915, the immigration almost stopped. I've heard that in 1950s and 60s, even, the African community, the black people, were having a very difficult time obtaining mortgages from the bank, obtaining business loans from the bank. So I want you to touch base on that, and also, is it still existing today?
Well, you heard right. You heard right. So you did do some homework, I see. It was a very, very hard time. And even though we obviously had means that funded our mobility, what ended up happening was the land that our people were allowed, I believe it was 150 acres, 160 acres, something like that. As the families grew, that actually wasn't enough to sustain a growing family. You needed more acres, right? And from what I've been told, and I grew up hearing this my whole life, they would not sell. And there were land swindles, there were thefts, they would, fraudulent stuff happen with deeds, that even though our people had just engaged in just backbreaking labor to build up those homesteads, there's quite a few families that lost them, by quite illegal, underhanded means. Okay. So when that's happening, I can't buy anymore, or you're trying to take what I have, coupled with the idea, well, you have to go to the big city for more education, right? That was a value of ours. We valued education. So moved to Calgary, moved to Edmonton. More numbers moved to Edmonton than Calgary. And so we get here, and you're very right. If you would try and even just get basic jobs, forget like things like loans and mortgages and things that we then needed to, build up. They would also deny loans on the homesteads too. They would deny loans. If you had a bad crop year, or let alone the depression that just like wiped out like so many people in the prairies. Certain people got loans, certain people didn't.
Okay.
Guess who? Guess who got, guess who didn't, right? Oh yeah, the fix was in. And then by the time the 50s hit, and then we're trying to, become more urbanized at that point in time, you would have a hard time even finding a place to rent, just putting a roof over your head. So there wasn't any official segregation policy, but what started happening was black folks, even if they had the means and definitely the work ethic and definitely, like the mindset of upward mobility, you were pushed into certain areas, right? Right off of 95th Street, what we now know is, kind of a not great area of town, right? If you wanted to rent in other parts, it just wouldn't happen. It just wouldn't happen. So there was a concentration in that, like lower socioeconomic neighborhood. In terms of businesses, yeah, I'll even fast track it to like the 80s, the 70s. And I even remember the problems that my father would have in getting loans and stuff like that. He actually, made friends with some white man and said, you go in and front the company. And guess what? They gave him the loan. So that whole thing about not having access to loans and funds and liquidity, that had a huge effect. And there came a point in time where the sons, they saw their dads being pushed into being a porter, which is basically just like, you're kind of like a servant on a train, to be honest with you. That's what it is. Okay. Or just other jobs like that, shining shoes, or just maybe waiting tables if you're lucky, maybe. Okay. They didn't really want to do what their dads did. They heard the humiliations that came along with working for those nickels and dimes, and they weren't really interested. So if maybe legitimate opportunities, doors of opportunities were closed, they said, well, we'll just do other stuff. We'll just hustle. We'll do other stuff. People are going to feed their children one way or the other.
Yeah.
So certain things happened.
Okay. Let's talk about your work with Black Women YAG.
So I am one of the co-founders of an advocacy collective called Black Women United. And we represent women who are experiencing issues in 4 key areas. So 2 are internal to our community, and then 2 are external. Okay. The external areas have to deal with workplace racism and discrimination. And what we see is the rising incarceration rates. Those are very concerning. Internally, the areas that we focus on, and I'll just deviate for a moment and just say all 4 are areas that ever since we've been in this province have had the effect of changing, sometimes irreparably, the lives of Black women and girls. Okay. So you can see how the workplace racism could change your life, how a bad interaction with the justice system could change your life. But what about some of the internal issues? That sexual abuse and exploitation and trafficking, domestic violence, right? That can change your life. Yeah. The community is a little more uncomfortable about the last 2, but they're just as serious. And because they're serious, we're serious.
Okay. All right. There was a federal initiative which was called, I believe, Racism Free Edmonton.
Okay.
It ran for a while and then it didn't go anywhere. I believe you were involved with them for a very brief time. And what I've heard is that a senior politician admitted that, just one businessman made a phone call and was shut down. So right now you're working with the Black Women United, but you have worked with some other groups. What are your thoughts on that?
I remember that incident, actually.
Okay.
So it was a city, and they had. Sorry, the memories are almost making me laugh. So they had this initiative where they were going to try and be less racist within the city and other institutions.
Okay.
So maybe, like some of the post-secondary institutions and other places. So, they had been meeting, the heads of these institutions had been meeting, and had decided we're going to come up with a website that is going to tell everybody not to be racist. And so they came up with a little website. It was published, and on the landing page of the website, there were 2 words that jumped out at everybody. And I guess it just punched them in the face. It was white privilege. And people went crazy. And they were calling up the politicians. They were calling up all the council members. They were calling up the mayor. And I guess a businessman called up and he's like, take it down. Boom. And you know what came down? The website.
Okay.
Just like that. It didn't matter what people had been meeting about, all their little intentions, none of that mattered. And at the end of it, they signed off on the whole initiative and just kind of wrapped it up. They came up with this idea. It will be scrolls. Take them to the kids. Have the kids sign the scrolls. There you go. Racism free Edmonton. And then they had this thing at City Hall. I was there. And they had all the heads of these institutions sitting on the stage. And I'm looking at all these white people. And they're saying, we won't be racist no more. And then all of us melanated people were sitting there and looking up at them, and we're like,
Okay.
yeah.
All right.
A lot of jokes from that day.
So, Junetta, if we want to sum up, there's a lot that you have seen. Your work has involved a lot of activism. There is a certain terminology which is used as, Canadian values and to assimilate, right? So that's what I want to ask you. Do you believe that assimilation or to assimilate in the society is the answer?
The answer, my short answer is no, but let me qualify that or explain that. So my people made the decision to assimilate. It happened kind of in my father's generation, so it was a decision that was made for anybody my age. I look at it this, I feel they all went somewhere, they took a vote, I wasn't invited, I was probably not even born, and they said, yeah, who all said, let's assimilate, who says I? And they all put their hands up except for maybe 3 dudes in the back. And that's what they did. They decided this burden of blackness is too much. I know what we've been through in the States, but this Canadian form of racism has gotten right to us. It has gotten to our hearts and minds, and we can't stand it anymore. So let me just, procreate with anything that's black that moves, and I just don't want to be black anymore. I don't want my kids to be black. I don't want my grandchildren to be black. I just want to check out. And they did. Bye. I don't recommend that for anyone else, but I can explain it. It's a phenomenon that impacts us called internalized racism. It's where the racism that society hurls at you gets on the inside, and so I start to see myself through the lens that they were seeing me. It's a form of agreement. Like, yes, I'm those things. You don't like me, now I don't like myself. You think I'm less, now I think I'm lesser. You think I'm ugly, now I think I'm ugly, right? It's all on the inside, and then the behaviors start to manifest that speak to those internalized beliefs. We are not the only people who have struggled with internalized racism. If you see it just globally, in, nations, you see how it pops up in some ways, right? So it's a thing. It's real. It didn't work for my people. When you are oppressed, whether you understand you're oppressed or not, you don't really understand legacy. You're just trying to get through the night. You're just living day by day, surviving, but you don't look long term in terms of your goals, your dreams, your aspiration, and what keeps you going is the idea that they will live on through your children whom are a reflection of you. That's out the window.
Okay.
So, and I'm going to borrow these exact words from Christine Frederick. She is Stan Daniels' granddaughter, who is an Indigenous leader locally. She's the executive director of the Dream Speakers Festival. And do you know what her grandfather told her? Infiltrate, don't assimilate. I think Christine should put that on a t-shirt. And you and I should have one. Infiltrate, don't assimilate.
So that's how you believe is a way for coexisting in this country?
Yeah, it happens a lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Junetta, you have worked on women empowerment. So what are the key messages for the women of color that you would like to give?
The first message, and to me this is one of the most important one, is to never let anyone define who you are. You have ancestors. You have lineage. You have culture. That whether you're really connected to it or not, but you have those things that can tell you more about yourself than anyone in this settler state ever could. What are those messages? Those stories of strength, those women back in your lineages, and they can be in your bloodline or maybe just your cultural lineage, that counts too. That show us how to live a life with dignity. Not being a footstool for a man, not being a footstool for just somebody here in this society, who maybe is signing our paycheck or whatever. That's not what we come from. And my number one message is to stand in that, embody that, remember who you are. You are that.
All right. Thank you very much, Junetta. Thank you for coming to our show. And this is a small gift from us to you. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, viewers, this was Junetta Jamerson, one of the first settlers and fifth generation Albertan. And I believe this program was truly very inspirational for you guys and informative as well. Thank you very much. Until next show, goodbye.